And we have, so every quarter we collect data in 175 countries on the cost of living of different countries, where I will also share some information on later in the presentation. We are together with about 300 to 400 colleagues. This is a part of them we met 2 years ago when we met our team in India. And our link with the Data Labor Association is that I invited Joanne to a webinar. So we organize with the gig team every 6 months a webinar on some global issues on the gig economy. And the last one in March this year was on data work. And there, Joanne and Evantus, they contribute from the worker perspective to the webinar. And when I was in Nairobi 1.5 months ago, I also interviewed Evantus for our Gig Work podcast, which is also now live, also on video and a blog. I will also share the link later. If you look to decent pay for data workers, so I'm really going to focus on pay. I really want to talk about two things. One are the conditions of pay, and then the second question is, okay, but how much pay is decent pay? Because there also quite some discussion on that. For the conditions part, I really want to use the input from the WageIndicator discussion paper on ethics of data work, principles for academic data work requesters. I think it's really great that they published this report, because in the end, when researchers are researching precarious work and then also abusing precarious worker, I think that's a really bad thing. So I think it's really good that they make this document with some good standards. We can also be used for a much broader audience. So on the conditions, I made a short summary of their text. So that's my own interpretation. Some points that come into the text are, okay, pay all the time needed to execute the work or a task. And this sounds quite no rocket science easy, but with data work, as you know, it's not the case, and also with platform work in general. Also avoid unpaid work, and I think especially don't put the risk of unpaid work on the shoulder of the individual worker, because what you see happening also broader in the platform economy, in the gig economy, that the risk, which normally also lies with the clients and the matchmaker, the platform, is now fully on the shoulder of the worker. I think that's something we should really avoid. Payment should also cover resources needed to complete a task. So in the end, that's because this is also a part of the calculation of the price. With foreign currencies, also take the exchange rates, but also the platform provision into account when you calculate what is a fair rate. Pay on time, and in the end also respect also the expertise of the data worker. So these are the points that were mentioned in the report of the WageIndicator discussion paper. So then the question where our specialty is on, but how much pay is decent minimum pay? Because it sounds quite logical, but in the practice it's quite complicated. So what we did, we also are now writing a paper on this, is the question, so where is a minimum pay based on? And we made this model. So there are two variables. So where is based on, and also what is the legal status of the worker, which I think also is really important in the discussion on data work. So if you look more to the traditional labor market, especially global north, where the employment model is the dominant contract model, then if you look to the consensus-based rates, you have national agreements, which is the statutory minimum wage, and sector agreements, which are minimum wages that are agreed in collective agreements. So again, minimum. And then if you go to the consensus-based rates with the freelance, so sorry, one moment. Yes. Yeah, then if you go look to the consensus-based rates for the self-employed, then you see minimum tariffs in collective agreements or code of conduct. So you see some sectoral agreements, like in New York, a minimum tariff set by intermediaries like platforms, and also some minimum tariffs set by local or national governments. Like in New York, the state of New York has some minimum rates for food delivery riders. they did this also within more local regulation. But when you see to the concession-based rate for self-employed, it's quite fragmented. So there's not really a good minimum pay calculations for self-employed, because most institutions, they're focused on the employment model. If you look to the actual cost-based rate, so a concession-based rate is a agreement on what's the minimum, but in the end, in practice, it's in many countries it also means it's not enough to live. So it's not based on, okay, so what are the costs needed to live in country X or in region X. So the other part of the calculation on how a minimum pay is being calculated is looking to the actual costs. So what does it cost to live in country X, region X? And based on that, calculate on how much a worker needs to earn. And that's something where the wage indicator does lots of work in. So what we do, we calculate every quarter the living wage. And the living wage is for employed workers. That is a floor on how much a worker should earn in different kind of family situations to have in the end a decent life in the region where they live. So see it as a really big shopping basket, and every quarter data collectors, they collect the data also physically within stores to see, okay, so what does it cost now in what region, and based on that we calculate a living wage which companies use to see, okay, so what is the minimum we should pay in region X for workers to have a decent life. So, and we do this with over 400 data collectors worldwide, and each quarter this data is being refreshed. We also combine this also with our other databases like labor law, wage labor database, CBAs, and minimum wage labor database, and based on that we make these calculations. But this is on employed workers. But what about self-employed workers? That's also the question I asked about a month ago in Geneva at the ILO convention. Because if you look to the ILO estimates, self-employment accounts for about 46% of global employment, while salaried workers are around 54%. And what you see is the institutions or the methodologies to calculate minimum wages or minimum pay are focused on the employment model. But what about the self-employed was the question I asked, and that was a nice discussion, because I think it's a no-brainer because that we also need to have a minimum calculation for this group of workers. And this discussion, I think, started a lot with the upcoming gig economy, because self-employed is, of course, not new at all, but it became really visible, especially also in Global North, when the gig economy arose. This is in Amsterdam, some food delivery riders. And also when you look at when platform workers are protesting, there you also see, this is a research by Leeds University, when platform workers are protesting, pay is everywhere in the world the top one priority on why workers protest. And also in the joint declaration in support of standards on a decent work in the platform economy at the ILO conference, also pay is also part of the program. So there are quite some institutions busy with talking about, okay, so how much should also a self-employed worker earn? And if you look to this, you see at the top right or at the bottom right a empty space which we now filled with the living tariff. So what we created was a actual cost-based rate for self-employed. So based on the cost of living of a certain area. So this tariff for self-employed, because we also know with data work, so I guess many at the BPOs, they are employed. And of course, there's much discussion about the conditions, which we also should discuss. But most working via platform, or I guess all are working via platforms, they are self-employed. So how we calculate a tariff for these workers, because in the end, it's the goal to also have these workers in the end, after all the risk and all the costs they make, come to a living wage. So first we have the net living wage. And this is what I just also described with the wage indicator living wage calculations. Here we take the year-round working days in the country as basis, and also then deduct the festive days and leave days from this. And this in the end results to a net living hourly tariff. That's the basis. The second one is the cost of income taxes and social security contribution for employed workers. Because normally these costs, they are at the employer, but the self-employed worker needs to take care of this themselves. This is why it's important also to take these costs also into account in the calculation on a fair tariff for self-employed workers. The third one are the occupational related costs for equipment. In gig economy, of course, a taxi driver has lots of costs, a car, fuel, insurance, but also online workers, they have quite some costs. They also in the end need to pay. So the internet connection, which was also mentioned by the previous presenter, but also a computer and all these kind of costs. So these occupation related costs also needs to be included when you calculate a tariff. And the last one is the occupation-related overhead time. So this is time that in the end you need to have as a self-employed worker, you need to spend on your profession, which is not directly being billable to a client. So time for administration, acquisition cost, communication with customers, training, and some other job-specific variables. So this is the time you also need to invest to be employable as a self-employed worker, but not hours that you can directly send an invoice to your client. So they also need to be included in calculating your tariff. So what we do with WageIndicator, we already added all these data points to our quarterly living wage cost of living data collection. And just to give you an example, because also within many discussions around data work and gig work, people are saying, okay, the worker needs to, in the end, have a living wage. But yeah, living wage is for employed workers. So what we also did was a kind of visualize, and there's of course lots of discussion on the data, but just to give you an impression on how a living wage, a living tariff for self-employed relates to a living wage for employed workers. And here you see in Kenya, the living tariff is 273% higher than the living wage. And this is for a taxi driver. And of course, this is quite logical because, yeah, there's also lots of cost included. If you look to a web designer, and I think data worker via platforms also fills in this category, if you look to the costs, then still you see that the living tariff for self-employed data workers should be, according to this calculation, 156.6% from higher than the living wage. So there's already a gap between those. And of course, there's always quite some discussion on, okay, but what data do we include? Let's say administration time. How much administration time do you have? Or these kind of questions. So what we also did with some co-funding from GIZ, we also made a tool which workers also can use. So I made some screenshots for the tool we developed in Kenya. So what you do is you say, okay, in which region are you based, and what platform type do you work, and based on that, it makes the calculation of the first two variables on, okay, then in the end, how much would you earn per hour, per month, and per year to come in the end after deducting all the cost and risk to a living wage. And of course, you can have discussion on many of those numbers, especially on, let's say, the occupational related costs for equipment, but also the occupation related costs for overhead time. So because maybe you say, okay, wage indicator, you say, let's say you have 10 hours per month on administration time, but I have 20 or I have 5. So this is why we created a tool where a worker, they can change these variables themselves in the tool, and in the end then calculate their own living tariff for self-employed workers. So then the question, but then who is responsible for decent minimum pay? Because it's nice to have a number, over here. But in the end, yeah, how to convert a number into impacts on the worker. And I think so there are different stakeholders that you can have discussion with. I think the first is the BPO or the platform company. Policymakers, and I say here regulation and enforcement, because I think the biggest problem with labor law is not there's not enough law, but there is a lack of enforcement, because I think in the end and the law is quite clear. Also for data work, because data work is work, and there are just employment laws to make sure that it is being executed decent. But the problems always come everywhere in the world on a lack of enforcement. The third category are the workers or the worker representatives, so the unions. They can also use this also in negotiations, and in the end also the clients. And I think the opportunity for data work is, so we know all from the gig economy that the problem is always that the clients, they always go for the lowest price. But the gig economy is also, especially the on-location gig economy, the clients are mostly, they are consumers, which means that there are a lot of suppliers, but also a lot of consumers. So it's really hard to take these consumers accountable for their behavior. But I think the interesting thing about the data work sector is that clients, in the end, they are business, and it's much more doable to make businesses accountable for fair pay for the work that they have in their supply chain. There's also some regulation about fair pay in supply chains, but I think it's a really big opportunity for the data work sector to also hold the clients accountable for, in the end, paying a decent wage for data workers. And it's not about money, because we all know the clients of data work platforms, they have the money. That shouldn't be a problem. If you see, because that's also the core of what we also do with WageIndicator, to provide this data to big multinationals in the world, and then by them also, making them to have better informed decisions on how to pay decent for workers. And in the end, the slides also show is I think paying workers fair is in the end good for everybody, for the worker, but also for the company. So I think it's a no-brainer in that. And to conclude, and also for some discussion, when I had discussions about data work, many people say, but we need new regulation, blah blah. I think especially for pay, I think for the occupational health and safety, there is a case for some additional regulation, not new. Because the problem is when you talk about new regulation, then you wait till there's new, and in between you do nothing. And I think that's a really bad thing, because there is already quite some good regulation also on occupational health and safety. But on pay, this is not new, because in the end, with WageIndicator, we support many industries. Also, like in Indonesia, also the textile and garment industry. A BPO is nothing different than a factory where clothing are being made. So in the end, the labor law on labor also applies on data work, especially when you look to the BPOs where people are employed. So I think we should leave the frame about this is new. This is not rocket science. This is just about decent pay and decent payment conditions. And just don't frame the discussion data work industry as an exception on that, because if you do that, then you also that is, I think, really in the end bad for the workers. To benefit of the data work sector compared to other platform companies is that serves a to business market, what I also described before. I think it's also important to understand that the wage and tariff floors I presented are not a benchmark, but a cost of living based minimum tariff. So it's a floor, especially also for vulnerable self-employed workers, such as undeclared workers. And also important for the more broader debate. So pay floors don't operate in a societal vacuum. They intersect with other market dynamics. And I think it's important when you have discussions on fair pay, you also need to look broader also to the labor market. And then sometimes come to the conclusion that the labor market is not functioning as we want as a society, and then also take accountability for that. So thanks for your attention, and I'm open for questions now during the events, but also via WhatsApp or by email later. And I will also share the link also to the living tariff tool for Kenya.
Some claps. Thank you, Martin, for the presentation, and it's very insightful. Like for me, if at all I was to ask, what is decent work and pay, or what is fair work? What is decent pay? What is fair work to the audience? Before you raise your own questions to Martin, do you know what it means? Yes, Wambui.
I'd say decent work is, or rather, decent pay is pay that you're paid for a service that you've offered, and it's paid to you on time.
Wambui says it's about time. If it is tomorrow, it's tomorrow. No more, no less. Who else?
Decent work is a work that does not harm the person doing the work, and it does not take away the freedom, especially of their basic rights. Decent pay is earning a reward, in this case mostly financial reward, commensurate with the value of the work you are doing, with your skills and the experience.
Certain companies give bonuses. Is that a reward that you would want to look out for? Although it's not definite, huh? It's not mandatory for you to be rewarded because it's not part of the contract that you signed between the employer and the employer. But I do remember, just before I open the floor to questions, how many people were working during the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic? By show of hands? I remember the International Labour Organization said that the same rules, or how you used to work in a physical environment, and now that you are working from home, should be treated one and the same, looking at those two different dynamics. You working from home, you have children, you have a family setup. It's not your office. It's a private space, but now you've migrated it into a workspace. And I know even today there are those who still work from home, and how you juggle around. There are those companies that assisted their employees to offer their internet bundles. How many got internet bundles? I still receive my bundles to date. Yeah, I still receive personally, because most of the time we work from home, and we are always told from the pay that you get, there's always a percentage that goes to service your internet and for your calls. How many still get that? In as much as you work from home, how many get their annual leave off days? By show of hands? Only a couple. 3. So Martin, only 3 people in this entire room. They work from home or they work wherever they are, but only 3 get their normal annual leave and off days, which that is not decent work. Actually, that's not decent work. Because part of decent work, you need to get your off days, your quarterly annual days to go off work completely. Yeah? Anyway, that was just to give you a reflection to what the presentation was all about. If you have a question to that, kindly shoot your hand up, and then we have our 10 minutes round of Q&A to Martin to help us understand better, and also to the team at DLA here.
Thank you for that. I think it's the reality that we are living in terms of access to decent work. It's very far-fetched nowadays, especially with digitization. And just to look at the ILO pillars on what decent work should look like, is that you should have access to employment, should not be struggling in terms of having access to employment, should not be struggling with issues to do with social protection, rights at work, as you've said, but also issues to do with freedom of association and collective bargaining, which is bringing us here. But then each and every day is usually a struggle even to access some of these rights. And just for example, just to give an example, if you're working from home, probably you don't have the right chair, you don't have the right desk, you don't have like issues to do with occupational health and safety, you don't even have access to. And also there is the restraint in terms of the law. Can an employer decide, okay, fine, you're asking in terms of issues to do with occupational health and safety, do I have access to your home? And how can I access your home to really provide that occupational health and safety? And that's bring a conversation in terms of, and just bringing back to the conversation that Majin has, is it Martin or Majin? Yes, in terms of the reality, the experiences may be different in terms of accessing some of these rights, and the laws, yes, are there, but how to access some of these rights is what I think is difficult. But also we need to look at accessibility to these. And given a chance, maybe I would go to the question issue. Should I? Okay, thank you. So I wanted to ask, in terms of the conversations around living wage, and I know this is, in Kenya, from my experience, we are still in the conversations of minimum wage. We haven't even started looking at living wages. So what could be your advice, especially now for the data labelers, in terms of how they should start engaging on the discussions of living wages? From your experiences, what are the issues that they should be bringing on the table, and what are the opportunities that are there? And what have you seen working or not working in terms of engaging in the spaces when it comes to living wages? Because it's quite difficult even talking about minimum wages in Kenya. But also, secondly, is also the issue of sexual bargaining. There are opportunities to have that in Kenya, but it has been dormant for quite a very long time. Is that like something that maybe the data labelers would like to look at in terms of maybe engaging in terms of living wages? Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks for your question. Yes, I think it's really important also within your introduction before your question that in the end, yeah, we really need to have a really strong worker voice within this debate, because you can't rely on one stakeholder to do good. It would be nice, but yeah, in reality, we all know that doesn't happen nowhere in the world. So it's always a struggle within different powers. Imbalances to make sure that the right conditions are being agreed on, and also in the end also come to life, so being executed. Because we can all have nice intentions on paper, but in the end, we need to also bring it into practice, because else it's worthless. So about the living wage, so I think there is already the living wage for Kenya, which is also on our website. So it is there, but in the end, of course, also same also with the living tariff, also for data work. The challenge is always on how to convince one of the stakeholders within the debate onto how to embrace this living wage. And with WageIndicator, with the living wage, so. And my colleagues of that, they have much more experience with that, because my background is more also from the gig economy and the living tariff. But the way I talk to people of the living wage team, so in the end, there are many big clients, big corporations that really say, okay, we want to take our accountability and our responsibility to, in the end, pay decent, or at least a decent minimum. This can come from a background from regulation that they need to do it, but also from a background on how they want to position themselves into the world. And I think for data work, it's so in the end, the first book on data work was called Ghost Work, the invisible hands of AI. I guess it was something like that. So I think the first important step is to make the work visible. Because if it's invisible, nobody cares. So when you make it visible, then you also can have discussions about this accountability. And by that also what we'll see with living wages, also for companies that want to implement living wage, it's still a process of years. So it's not something that you can do within, let's say, 1 month, because you really need to see on how to also integrate it also into your whole supply chain. So I think it's also what I also learned from living wage is also a kind of a ongoing conversation, but it's a conversation based on the will to do the right thing, and not to so it's also not something philanthropic. It's also just about, because in the end also companies, they also benefit from motivated good workers. So I think, and that was also my dilemma in discussions when I was in Nairobi 1.5-2 months ago, and also had many meetings and conversation interviews with workers and entrepreneurs, that in the end we also shouldn't make it harder than it is, the problem. So the problem in the end, of course, on the account of the worker is really hard, because not enough pay has severe consequences. But the question on what to do is in the end make sure that the pay is decent. And I think that the living wage for employed workers and the living tariff is a good starting point for the discussion, because in the end also the living tariff which we have on the website, it's a kind of a ongoing methodology that we adjust by talking to many stakeholders, and maybe in one country it works different than in other countries. But I think first would be where I would focus on are the employers or the clients, where the BPOs and the platforms are working for. By unionizing, I think that is more important than ever, especially within data work, because their demand and supply, they are most of the times on different continents, which makes it also harder to get these issues on the agenda. So I think a really strong worker participation is really needed for this, and also unions also going to start to embrace this, because also within unions, especially my experience with unions is that unions, they also are focusing, especially on global north, mostly on employed workers, and they forget or don't care or whatever, just how to frame it, the self-employed workers. I think it's important that also unions will start understanding that they are there for all workers, and they also need to find ways also from how to come up for the rights, in this case of decent pay for workers. And that's also why I also really support the Data Labor Association in taking steps into this sector.
Thank you, Martin. Another question?
First of all, I have some comments to make. Martin said you are working with the WageIndicator Foundation, if I got it right. And one of the things that struck me in your presentation is the decent minimum wage. I was hoping that those two things cannot be in the same sentence, decent and minimum. I don't know if we have a better one. Either we use one or we replace. I do not have a perfect suggestion, but I don't think they should be in the same sentence, decent and minimum. Because the reason I'm saying this is because that from my experience and from the experience of most of us is that the employers take advantage of that minimum thing, and they actually go to pay that minimum. And sometimes they do it in a very crude way. Like in Kenya, the minimum wage is about 15,000 Kenya shillings per month. And that was supposed to be for house helps. And so when they come to pay you, they say, if they pay you 18,000, for example, and then you say, you know what, this money is not it's not commensurate with what I'm giving the company. They tell you, you know, we are paying above the minimum wage. So I think it's just something that you as a foundation, you need to consider, because if an employer is looking at your reports, or a potential employer is looking at your reports, they might really use them. Like in Kenya, they can actually quote it and say, you see, the WageIndicator Foundation said, in Kenya, the minimum wage or the living wage is this money. So they add some coins on top and they say, we are paying above that. In fact, there is a time they told me that they were paying me twice the minimum wage. By that time, I think it was 13,000 per month. So it doesn't make any sense at all. All right, and sometimes you realize that it might not be possible to really quote a figure for the employers. But the way you present this data can in a way guide them. Because like I said, for example, what you have already presented, if they get hold of it, they will say, you see, this is how it goes. And I noticed, by the way, in Kenya, the people are working for more hours for less money. If you look at the rates, I think I saw something 6.7 hours and the others 2.5, something like that on your like third slide. So you might consider, first of all, change the wording. And then in terms of when you're presenting the reports, especially like the data labelers, I wish you can look at both sides. Because what I noticed that your foundation and companies like yours, what they do is that they focus on the side of the employee. They focus on the money only. They focus on the side of the employee and on the money only. I don't know if that is just a niche you've decided to focus on, but I wish you focused on the whole thing. For example, if you are looking at data labelers, let's look at how much pay will be like, say good, like depending on what they're giving the company. Look at what will they need to do their work well. Because a good employer will come and ask you, what resources do you need? What do you need me to provide you with so that you can be able to do your job well? But a wicked one will just tell you, I want this delivered, I want you to work for these hours, and I want this quality, I don't want it to be compromised, and all that and all that. Sometimes forcing you to even work extra hours. So I think my issue is just with the way you present and the way the specific aspects you focus on. You need to look at the people who are going to consume that information, especially the employers and the governments. Another thing that I was thinking of is that if you are looking at what these employees are saying they earn, or if maybe you are doing your surveys and this one says, you know, on average in Kenya, we need like 20,000 to be able, like the living wage thing. It looks like the climate now from the economic side, because it's like you're looking at the habits. And then if you establish that it's 20,000, now you are telling the employers, you know, this person, just give them 20,000. They'll be able to buy food, they'll be able to pay rent, they'll be able to get their basic needs. Basically, that's what you're doing. You are doing it subconsciously without telling them directly. So it's something that you might have to rethink again and say, well, this is what I have seen is that you are looking at the expenses in terms of the basic commodities and to the poorest person, basically, without considering this person who is working, doing that job. Let's use data labelers, for example, is how much money are they making for the employer? Have you considered that? Maybe have you gone to those companies and interview them and say, you have this number of labelers. They are helping you train this model. And when you, like right now, you have ChatGPT Premium, people pay for them globally. And some of those is, how do we call them? Money they keep getting without having to work again because people already trained the model. So you might have to look at the other side. Okay, this is what the poorest person uses to make a daily living, or rather they spend in a month. This is the kind of working conditions they go through. This is the support they will need to do their job right. These are some of the challenges after they leave work. But again, now you look at, when we talk about the value that person is bringing, the monetary value, what will happen to that company if all those people stopped working? How much will they lose? What else will they lose in terms of brand reputation? That's when we talk about value. Then now you can combine these two, and when you are talking about either you use minimum or decent, don't use both. Now you can be able to have a holistic approach. That is what I think. Thank you.
Martin,
Yeah,
before,
great.
you,
Thanks.
before you come on board,
Yeah.
let's listen to one, and then you'll take all of them.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Naftali. I think that was very spot on. And just for further context, because I think organizations that do international work, I think this is where they miss the mark. The way Kenya approaches minimum wage is quite different to a lot of other jurisdictions. in a lot of other jurisdictions, minimum wage does mean, decent living, and that's why you're looking at the cost of living in that city and factoring inflation and then coming up with an amount. But in Kenya, minimum wage is a prescribed amount for people who are on the outlier categories where unionizing is not an option for them. And we have pronouncements from courts saying when it comes to unionized employees or employees in situations that can unionize, it's not for the government to set the minimum wage, it's for the collective bargaining process to set the minimum wage. That is why when you look at our minimum wage order, for example, it has very specific categories and very specific prescriptions for cleaners, for house helps, for nannies, very listed and very constricted to where you couldn't interpret it broadly. So that then the moment you bring up minimum wage in professional conversations for content moderation and data labeling, it's feeding to a narrative that platforms are already abusing, that they are already relying on minimum wage. But that's the same thing as saying, we don't value your work. We consider you a casual laborer. We consider you an informal worker, and that's why we're subjecting you to the minimum wage. Whereas what we're saying is, I show up to this job every day, I should be a unionized or a unionizable employee where my minimum wage is set by unions. But again, there's another whole elephant in the room where union busting is a key problem in that field as well. So it's a structural issue, and I see what Naftali was referring to, and I see the misstep in assuming like all the countries look at minimum wage the same. I think it's a very important context to have, and I suspect for different African countries it's the same, so that then you create those exceptions to where the words decent and minimum wage don't mean the same thing and not even used in that perspective.
Thank you. You can pick up, Martin.
Yes. Okay. So thanks very much both for your questions and also your comments. So in the end, so it's also a ongoing conversation. So I also learn a lot, also of course from your input. So thanks for that. Yeah, sharp, decent, and minimum. Should they be in the same sentence or not? I think that's a really important one to mention, especially with minimum wage, because. Also on our website, we also have a page where we show of all the countries in the world where how the minimum wage and living wage are relating to each other. Because in many countries, the minimum wage is far too low to have a decent living at all. So then decent and minimum wage are of course not appropriate to say in the same sentence. So thanks for that. The other, let's see if I can read my own my own writing over here. If you look at so with WageIndicator, we really look to the cost of living. So we also make an offset on the living wage, but we calculate or we collect the data for the living wage, and the challenge is that we're looking globally, and we're not looking to sector specific. And that's of course also a limitation. We can say something about, okay, so what are the costs of living in which region in Kenya, but we can't really go into the specific situation of a sector like data work. It's also why you also collaborate with other stakeholders within different regions, also for extra inputs when we have more sector specific questions. Because in the end, yeah, you really need to have this knowledge, and that's also why we also really like the conversation we have with the Data Labor Association, also to learn from this context. So I also really welcome you also to keep this discussion also going, because in the end, I think we all have to have the same goal, and of course you need to be careful in the wording, not that's a living wage or minimum wage is not being abused to pay less. That's also one of the things also in the Weizbaum report about also showing the the expertise of the worker and also compensating for that. So I think that's really also important to take into this discussion. And if you look to other variables, and there we also see the challenge within employed and self-employed, because for employed, WageIndicator Foundation was also really firstly focusing a lot on employed work, because many variables we also took from our labor law database. But yeah, within labor law, employed is much more represented than self-employed. So there is, I think, a gap within the whole discussion in labor markets. That's many institutions, they focus too much on the employed worker, and by that ignoring the self-employed or the non-employed worker. So I think that's also really important to highlight in that. And further, I think also for time issues, I think it's. I also will leave my email address here in the chat, and I'm really happy. So everybody that really want to keep the discussion going, I also welcome to stay in contact. And maybe it's also nice, just maybe also an invitation also to the team of the Data Labor Association also to maybe do a smaller discussion roundtable online on pay, to really go into these topics to in the end to make this concept really work for data workers.
Thank you, Martin, but I'm not letting you go off easy. We have a question online. It will be read by Joanne, and then Juliet. You'll read the question, and then I'll come the last one to Njeri.
So I will read. Thanks, Martin. I second what Naftali said. I also want to ask about what you mean when you said people says we need regulatory systems, blah, 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 blah. That's when I actually stopped listening. What do you mean by blah, blah, blah? Does that mean we don't need regulatory systems in Africa to hold employers accountable?
Yes. So thanks for your question. I also saw it in the chats. So I think the context of what I mentioned there is that that's also something what I also saw with the upcoming of platforms like Uber and others. That many people say, okay, this is different, so we need to have new regulation. And then the strategy of those platform companies was first ignoring they fall under regulation. Then they say, yeah, maybe we should fall under, but yeah, we're different, so we need to have new regulation. And then the court cases came, and then it took about 10 years before there was any regulation. So I think the reason why I mentioned this was that I think that we need to be really careful on directly talking about new regulation, and maybe first look, okay, so what do we already have on regulation? And how does a different interpretation or enforcement of this regulation can already help on short term for the workers? Because this framing of new and new regulation is also a kind of framing by platform companies to avoid responsibility. If you also look to many court cases against big platforms, so I'm really now looking to the gig economy, most of them, they are won by existing regulation. Not by new regulation. Of course, there is new regulation in place, and also mainly focus on the impact of this technology on the worker. But the basic discussions on worker rights, on pay, on legal classification, in many cases they already fall perfectly under existing labor law. So I'm a big fan of regulation to protect workers, but I think also for the discussion and also for the impact on short term, it's also really important to first look, okay, so what do we already have, and how can we use it to make the situation for workers better now or tomorrow or in a year, and not only look on, okay, so this is something new and now we need to have new regulation, and this takes about 10 years, and in between yeah, the worker, their rights, yeah, okay, we don't care. So I'm really in favor of regulation for workers, but I'm always a bit skeptical when people say directly we need to have new regulation, because existing regulation in many cases already perfectly is suitable for protecting the worker rights. And most of the time it's a lack of enforcement or political lobby and interest. But yeah, by only looking on or blaming regulation, I think you are looking in many cases to the wrong stakeholder.
My question is on it will ride on the question that Marcy asked, and it's on the feasibility of coming up with a new term that is able to capture the unique situation that data workers find themselves in, because when we're discussing living wage and living tariff, it is based on the binary classification of employment, so self-employed and employed, but you often find that data workers teeter on the border of the two types of employment. So do you think it is realistic, and it is something that we'll see happening in the future, for another term to be conceptualized that is able to now allow for the adequate and complete protection of data workers?
Yes, thank you very much for your question. So the self-employed category of living tariff is focusing on everybody without an employer, where the employers, the risk and costs that are normally on the account for the employer are now on the individual worker. And if this worker is a freelancer in a formal market, so we all put them in this category self-employed. But what you say, there are also people are having hybrid constructions. Also from the survey that was presented before, there's quite a amount of workers that are working via a BPO and via platform, and probably also doing other work on the sites. So yeah, this really takes a more custom calculation for that, and I think for that, so the calculation tools we now have are really on those binary two different categories, and I think it would be interesting, but also highly complex, to create something where you can also combine these kind of things. So I think it would be interesting to discuss how you can make it. So in the end, because in the end, also our goal is also for workers to make visible. So, okay, what do you should earn in the end to earn a living wage. So it would be really nice also to combine those different concepts, but that is something that we are not working on right now. But I think for the future it would be really interesting, and I also would love to have discussion taking further on that.
Thank you, Martin. And perhaps to wrap the sessions, because for the next one, maybe if you have some final thoughts, then I hand it back.
Some final thoughts. I think we discussed a lot. I think, and this also really shows that it's all part of a discussion. It's not one stakeholder to say, okay, I know the truth and listen to me because what I say is right. I think this discussion really shows that it's a ongoing conversation of also different kind of sectors, different kind of industries, different kind of cultures are coming together, and in the end also need to really understand each other's context of where they're acting on. So I think one thing that I really want to share as a last takeaway is that we really need to have these kind of discussions ongoing. It's not something that you create and then it's finished, you wrap up, and then, okay, for the next 10 years we can use it. I think it's really important to have these ongoing discussions with as many different stakeholders together, and then also really understand and also respect each other's stand where we all, where every stakeholder comes from, or what their perspective or their interest is. So I think because it's really important also to understand why other stakeholders are doing what they're doing, even when they're doing evil, shitty stuff, it's still really interesting and also important to understand why they are doing it. So I think these kind of conversations really contribute to this mutual understanding. And the only thing that I can say is we should have these conversations ongoing to keep on learning from each other in the end, to come to different interventions that can in the end contribute to better working rights.
Thank you so much, Martin, and everyone else for your contribution.